The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ciara Beddy, and I'm an FME Certified Professional Trainer here in IMGS, and I am sitting with Lauren Lucas, our FME expert, and she's going to run through a process she's created for triggering FME with your database. So it's a really interesting setup that Lauren has to show you how automation with FME makes your life a little bit easier. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Lauren, and she's going to go through the process.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the webinar this afternoon. So just want to make sure that the audio is okay for everybody. So if anyone's having difficulties with audio, if you just want to pop a comment into the box, and we'll try and get that sorted out for you. But I'm going to plow ahead anyway, and we'll get started. So when it comes to managing data contained in your database, it can be quite a laborious process to track changes and run different processes based on those changes. So I know that change detection management is quite important for a lot of different, for county councils, for utility companies, and also to kind of track the responsibility behind those changes as well. So who has made the changes or what machine those changes were made from. So that's something that we're going to be looking at today. So you can use triggers on your database to actually run FME. Now that can be FME Desktop and Server, and we'll look at that in a moment. And this can help you manage and report on the changes that have been made by sending parameters from your database through to FME. So the following webinar will show an example where we will monitor the changes happening on a particular data set in the database, run a workspace based on those changes, and then schedule a workspace to run a report on this in a comprehensive manner and on an ad hoc basis as well. So whether you're using FME Desktop or Server, it is possible to set up triggers and execute workspaces via both. So we will take these instances separately. So let's move on through. So first of all, we're going to look at triggers for FME Server, and then we're going to have a quick look at for desktop, and we'll be looking at what the differences between both of those are. You can actually perform the same operations for both. It's a little bit easier to set up for FME Server than it is for FME Desktop, but it's still possible. And then we'll look at reporting on the changes. So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be sending parameters to FME, and we're going to track changes in a table. So instead of sending off a notification straight away that there's a change has happened, we're going to actually log those changes in a table, and then later on we can report on those changes. So that could be a scheduled report, or you could run it yourself on an ad hoc basis. And the reason we're doing that is because if somebody's going in and, say, digitizing records, and you have a trigger on your database to notify when somebody has inserted a record, and they insert maybe 50 records, for example, you're going to get 50 emails. So that's not something that you want. So that's why we're going to put it into what we call an archive table for today's purposes. So with FME Server, as I said, it uses a URL to pass the parameters through, and it calls the workspace via an FME Server repository. So anybody that's not familiar with FME Server, what an FME Server repository is that when you create a workspace in your FME Desktop, you can publish this up to Server, and you can put it in a certain folder. So the URL passes parameters from the database and calls a certain workspace that you have published up to FME Server. Through the desktop, we're actually going to use a batch file. So again, this is going to call the FME executable and also the location of your workspace, and then pass through a parameter, and it's a parameter that will go in as a publish, will be received in as a publish parameter into your workspace. And again, I think what's really important to remember is that these triggers are just a way to pass data from your database into FME. Once you get it into FME, the possibilities are endless. You can do whatever your normal processes are. It's just a way of having that middleman removed, so that it's an automatic trigger.
Okay, so your process is going to show us if you make a change to your database, it's going to archive that change for you.
Correct.
So you can summarize it and report on it at the end of the day to get a list of all the changes that were made in the table.
Yeah, okay. So if you were to think of it, and maybe a business case would be that this example is like a planning data set where we have sites and we have points, and what we're going to do is we're going to go in and edit those sites and points, and that's going to go into this table, and at the end of the day, the data manager can go in and say, right, this is a table of all the changes that were made, and you can do various reports on it.
Okay.
So before setting your triggers, so how we created these triggers were actually based on some articles that have been made available by Safe Software on their knowledge base. So if you want to go and find out how to do this, I'm going to show you some of the really important bits, but there are certain configurations that need to be set up in your database first if you want to connect a server. So it would be important that you do read these articles before you go and try and create these triggers, because it will save you a lot of time. So if you want to head to the knowledge base, just search triggers and you'll find that there are a couple of articles on there. And if you're struggling to find where those are, please drop us an email and we'll be happy to send them on to you, no problem. Okay, so let's start off with FME Server, because the trigger is a little bit bigger, so it'll kind of set us up nicely for the batch file that we'll run later. So for FME Server, as I said, this is going to use a URL to pass parameters into your published workspace. Again, for anybody that's not familiar with Server, I would have created a workspace, published it up to FME Server. That's now sitting on my server, ready to be used by this trigger. So I'll just go through a bit of a breakdown. Here's the workspace first. Okay, so what we have is, you can see there's a creator there. So what this is doing is it's taking in the record and the parameters that are being passed through from the URL, and I'm going to show you the breakdown of that trigger in a moment, but it just might be handy for you to understand what workspace is actually being triggered on the back of it. So here you see I've got a parameter fetcher, and you can see some of my published parameters up here in the corner. So I have the planning reference, I've got that ref published parameter right here. So I'm taking through this reference published parameter, I'm fetching it and I'm giving it a name. I've also put a date formatter on there because I'm taking through a timestamp, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. And then I'm pushing it into this planning changes archive. So I can show you in the database in a moment. I'll show you the different data sets. We have sites, points, and this new table that I've created, and I'll show you more about that in a moment.
So Lauren, all the parameters that you want to use in your workspace are published.
Correct.
And it's the trigger that is sending that information into the workspace.
100% correct.
So whatever you need to, in your case, report on, you have created a published parameter out of it. So you can then use it. Okay,
that's exactly it.
So that's good.
Yeah, so for example, say some of these published parameters are actually coming from the server itself. Okay. So you've got a timestamp here, so that's a get date from the server itself. You've got a Windows user, that's a host name function from the server itself. So not everything is coming from the actual data set, but you do have other things like the reference, which is just a column in the data set. So that's also coming through. Okay, so moving on. So a little bit of breakdown. I think it might actually be handy if I go and I show you the tables in the database. So here we have, let's see, okay, so I move these now, don't want to reveal any of my secrets too soon. Okay, so here you can see I've set up this demo planning database. And in here I have some GM sites and GM points, and then I created this new table called Planning Changes Archive. So in here I added in any attributes that I wanted to have in my archive table. So there are certain things, say for example, I might not want the geometry in the archive table, or I may want the geometry in the archive table. It's up to you what you want logged. But for the purposes of this, I just wanted to get some key information like the planning reference number so that I could go back and relate it to other tables if need be. Also, just to note that this was actually open sourced data that was found on Dublinked, so it was easy to go in and just kind of manipulate and play around. So that's another great resource for anybody out there looking to do some mock data sets to play around with this stuff. And so I got the planning reference number, the application date, the type, and again this SQL function of getting the date, which the date and time at which the record was edited, the operation, so this is going to be whether the record was inserted, deleted or updated in the database, and then the host name of the machine. So again, this is about tracking the responsibility, what machine was this record edited on, and as I spoke about earlier on, you can actually go and there are further processes you can do to get the user log on. Okay, so you'll see these geometry columns that are here are actually because these are intergraph geomedia tables, and the reason I have them as such is so that I can show you the data in geomedia. So here you can see we have some planning sites and points. Again, just some open source data. I was able to go in and use FME to get out a center point and create some dummy application points. So you can see here, if I just click on the geometry, you can see these are the attributes in here. So they're a fully populated data set, which is always nice to have. Okay, so now if I go and we have a look at the triggers. So you set the triggers on the table which will be changed. So even though everything is going to be going into my planning changes archive, there are actually no triggers set on that table. The triggers need to be set on the table that is going to be edited by geomedia in this case. So on my sites table, I can go in, I can see here that I have archive sites update, insert, and delete. So what I've done is I've used the same format for the trigger, and I've just manipulated it for the different operations. And I'll show you the breakdown of that trigger now. So we go back to okay. Right, so the breakdown. So create the trigger for the specified operation, again, whether it's insert, update, or delete, based on the table that is going to be edited. So here you see we have create trigger. This here is the name of my trigger. And then here we have on the sites table. And this particular trigger is an update. Then another part, the next main part of the trigger is pass through the parameters. So this can kind of be, I'm going to go through this nice and slowly because it's a little bit difficult to get your head around, and I suppose the best way to show you is actually to go back up to our workspace here. If you have a look at these published parameters, you'll see the names in brackets. So this is what the parameter is actually called. So while its name might be operation, what it's actually defined as is operation here with a small o. So if we go and have a look at our trigger, you can see operation with a small o. So it's really calling the name of the published parameter. And because we have set this as an update trigger, we're going to hard code that operation parameter to say, yes, it's an update. So where it's a published parameter in the workspace, it's giving you the option to push in an update, an insert, or delete. But when it comes to the trigger, because of the type of trigger that it is, it's actually a hard-coded parameter. Yeah. So something that would be the opposite of that then is, say, the date. This date parameter, if we go back up and have a look here, so you can see it's a date. I've called it a timestamp in the actual workspace, and I've given it, a default of 1991. So this is actually a date trigger, and it's coming from SQL Server itself. So it's a get date function, and these cast functions, basically what we're doing here is taking this date parameter, so that I'm defining which published parameter I'm going to be equating this to. Then there's the function in the middle. So for example, here we have cast the plan reference, so it's calling a column. This particular one has got a function. Now, by casting, what we are doing is we are sending the parameter, as you can see as char here, because it's going to go into a URL. So we need to remove the kind of field type, if you like, because it's all going to be in one big long string in the URL. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. So just to clarify that, I know it can be quite confusing. What we have here is we have a number of different parameters. Here's our user parameter. Here's our date parameter. This one here would be our application date or application type parameter. So this is just a small selection of the code here. And then we have our reference parameter, and we have our hard-coded operation parameter here.
So Lauren, with those triggers,
yes,
each one of those are going to call the same workspace. It's just that it'll give it a different operation.
That's exactly it.
So it's not a different response for each. It's just an update, a delete, or an insert trigger that happens as a result of the change made on the table, and then that gives the information for you to hard code and pass into your your workspace.
That's exactly it. So in this particular workflow, we are going to call the same workspace. On this particular workflow, we're going to call the same workspace every time, and we're just going to pass through different parameters based on that.
Now that makes sense, yeah.
What you could do, if you wanted to, is that if there is an update, you could have that set off a different workspace.
Yes.
You know, so
you're not restricted to having to use one.
That's exactly it. But in this particular scenario, we are, because of the kind of archive table.
Yeah, you're going to log everything in one.
That's exactly it, yeah. Okay, so moving on from the parameters, it'll become a little bit clearer as we go through. Then what you're doing is you're pointing that URL to the workspace that you want to use. So this is the workspace again that you've seen the workflow there a moment ago. That was published up to FME Server. So that's sitting in a folder on FME Server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that workspace now and pass these parameters through. So this is what's happening here. So it builds it as a URL with parameters. That's the idea. And I think the best way to show that to you is we have some sites, data distribution sites set up, like HTML pages that use FME Server workspaces, and they expose the parameters, which make it kind of easy to understand what's going on. So here you can see, I don't know, that image might be a bit crowded, but what you have here is you have some parameters. These are all coming from a workspace. You don't need to go into how they are, but if you're interested, by all means do drop us an email. But what's going on here is that you have a certain set of published parameters in a workspace, and these are being exposed through this HTML page. Now, you see you've got a year parameter, you have a decision parameter, and an output format. And then there's also this geometry box here as well. Now, what you can see down the bottom is the query that's being created. So you can see here it's calling the FME server, it's calling the repository, it's calling the workspace, it's calling then also the published parameters. So you can see here, and decision equals grant. This is something that has been set up here. So you can see clearly now, you can kind of see where it's taking each published parameter and it's building this URL that it's going to send off and run the workspace.
So that's really what you have replicated.
That's really, that's exactly, this right here is kind of what you're replicating in your trigger, that kind of format. Okay, so let's go and show you it now. So if we go into GMedia, okay, and what we're going to do is I'm going to create an insert site. So go down here, click on my sites, digitize a box real quickly. Okay, now because of the certain parameters that are set, there are certain things that I have to fill in. So let's see, 13, 40. So these are just the formats that those columns are expecting. So that's why I'm just making sure that I get them in properly so that it runs. Decision, let's say content. Okay. So when you're seeing GeoMedia load like this, it's because it's quite dynamic and you're actually seeing SQL Server run in the background there. So this was quite handy when I was setting up the triggers themselves, because it meant that if something was failing in SQL Server behind GeoMedia, it was actually telling me in an error dialog on GeoMedia itself that, you know, the record wasn't going in correctly. So that was quite handy when I was setting this up. So now if we go to a table, I'm going to go here. Now just to remind you maybe what the workflow was actually doing. Here, so again, getting my parameters, formatting the date, writing it into the table.
So you're expecting, because you made that change there, you made a new insert, that a workspace would have been kicked off.
Correct.
And a log would have gone into that planning changes archive to indicate.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So again, this is something I would have had to, there are a couple of things that you have to set up here with your FME server, like you have to give it an FME guest privilege on the repository where you have that workspace, published to. But those kind of things, the great thing about working with SQL Server is that when you try and run these commands and test them, it'll give you the errors as you go along. So it's pretty easy to kind of figure out what's going wrong if it's not working for you. So then if we go in here, and I say get my top, okay. So I've been doing a lot of editing in here today. Okay, so what we have down the bottom is you can see that this is a build up then of all the records that are coming in. You can see I'm getting my timestamps in here as well. I'm getting my operations, whether it's being inserted, deleted, and I'm also grabbing the host name. This is the name of my machine that I'm using today. So this is the information that I'm grabbing through, and I'm also passing through the planning reference number, the application
So
date
an
and type.
insert would have gone into that table.
Correct, yeah.
And can we see that the workspace was run from server if we had to troubleshoot to see if there was a problem?
Absolutely, yeah. So if that didn't run in, what you'd be able to do is go back here, let's see. Now, so anyone again not familiar with FME server, this is what it looks like. Okay, so I will go to my might need to log in again. Internet's a little slow today. Okay. Okay, perfect. So yeah, so this is what FME server looks like. What you can do is I can go in and I can check my jobs that have been run. So this is also, again, a great way, Kieran's a great point, it's a great way to monitor if your process has succeeded or not. So you can see there, 1519 ran.
Was done,
yeah, it was triggered. You can go
features written.
Yeah, and actually another great way to make sure that your parameters have come through is you can actually see them here. Like if your workspace is failing, I would double check that there are actually parameters coming through, because if this is blank, then that's definitely that's the first thing that's going wrong. And then of course you can go in and you can view your logs. That's just another little handy tool with that you have with FME server. So like as I said, these processes can be done for desktop, but you don't have all this kind of ability to go back and check what may be going wrong.
Life easier,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then if I were to go in here and let's say escape that, and I want to go and I want to edit, so I can say grab this here and pull it over there. So again, I have set 3 triggers up. I set one for update, one for delete, and one for insert. So every time this happens, this is what's happening again. It's running in the background and it's saying, yeah, that trigger is being kicked off there. Great. So as Ciara pointed out, I can go back here. I can check that it's run 23. So you can see it's instantly, it runs straight through. I have to say that's another great thing that I really like about working with the database is that those triggers, they're instant.
Yeah.
You know, so that's it's nice and quick for testing and kind of seeing your processes work. Yeah. So again, I can go in here, refresh, execute that query, and you'll see here's my update.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see it on my record there. So now what I'm going to show you is, so that's the trigger going through FME server. Let's just check where we are here. Okay, yeah, so we're on to the desktop work. So let's have a look.
So it's great that you can do this through desktop, but I'll ask the obvious question, was it easier to do it through server?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, and like I'm not just saying that, it genuinely was. Like, for example, in that batch workflow that I'm sending through, I am actually only sending through one published parameter because it was so much harder to get a lot of them working at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas with the FME server workflow now, and I would be no SQL expert, absolutely not, I kind of was given the basis for the trigger from those articles, and I went in and I manipulated them, and I found it much easier to manipulate the URL and how that was constructed, because you were just adding in. Dealing with the batch file is a little bit more difficult, and also I'm not 100% sure, but I think that you might only be able to put up to 9 parameters into a batch file, and after that you might actually need to refer to a parameter file.
Okay.
So there's a little bit more involved there.
So it's probably a little bit more work, but you can still
you can do it, and I think that's the great thing, is that there's still the option.
Yeah.
You know, you're not restricted that if you can't get access to FME server, it is something that you can still do through desktop, which I think is great. So use the batch file, as I just said. We pass the parameters from SQL Server to publish parameters in FME this way. And what I've done is I've actually highlighted here the contents of my batch file, and I put them into different colors so you can kind of see the breakdown. So in red, what we have here is it's calling the FME executable from its location. Then it's calling my workspace. And then it's passing in this, so it's --ref. So again, if you remember, I showed you the workflow. Ref was the name I had given to my planning reference published parameter. Yeah. So that's what that is there. And then what you put is percentage, and in the middle you put whatever you have defined in your database on the trigger.
Right.
So you'll see now in a moment, so it's like saying @ref is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
So it's that @ref is kind of the tag really that I'm giving my my publish parameter in SQL Server database. Okay, so this is the trigger here. So earlier on we mentioned that you put create trigger. It's also great that once the triggers are created, they're stored there in your database, so you can go and edit them as you please. So you'll actually see alter trigger. So if it's already been created, you don't need to go and create a new trigger if you want to do something a little bit different, which you can edit it, which is quite handy. So this is my trigger bat point delete trigger. And this is on my points table. So the reason, kind of what I was thinking was, okay, we've proven that you can go and you can write into a table and then you can report on that later, and I'll show the reports in a moment. But what I think is, would be really beneficial is, deleting a record in some instances can be quite a serious offense, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But so this might be something that you want to get notified. If you're a data manager, you want to know, say, if a planning application point has been deleted from your database, because that, like sites and stuff with the different relationships, you may not need to have a site, but planning points normally are kind of steadfast. So so this is kind of the workflow that I was thinking, that if a point gets deleted, I want to be notified straight away. So what we're doing there now is we've got a trigger here. As you can see, we've got my publish parameter referenced here. This is my batch file that contains this here, this string here. And then we're just executing the command shell to run the batch file. So again, this trigger, that's the whole point of these triggers, is that the minute the change happens, they're set off from the database. So it's kind of that instant workflow. So instead of, a lot of these things, for example, you could do a change detection on your database and you could have that scheduled to run nightly, but it's just a little bit more messy. This way it's a cleaner workflow. It happens, I suppose the thing about spatial information and information in general these days is we want to know things as quick as possible. Yeah. So these triggers kind of enable that. Relevant, yeah, exactly. Enables to happen and let you know what the latest information is. So if we go down and have a look. So this is the workspace that the batch file is calling. So again, we have our creator here. This is passing the information through. In this creator, a lot of people would actually normally use this for geometry objects. But what we've done in this case, if we set the parameter to a geometry object of null and just pass through the parameters and use the parameter fetcher to get those attributes coming through. So that's what that's for anybody out there that's kind of thinking, oh, normally that's geometry. No, you can still pass through your record that way. Then we've also got a timestamper. So in the database, I showed you the get date. So you were able to see that the get a current date from the database was being passed through as a parameter. But if you don't want to kind of make your trigger too complicated, you'd like to keep it nice and simple, remember you have the full function of FME after you've triggered off the data. Once you get your data through to FME, you can still do all of your normal functionality. So I've actually used the timestamper from FME. So here I have a timestamper, I have an attribute manager just to put in some different things that I wanted, and I have an emailer to kick it off. Again, an emailer is, what year did that come out?
It only came out in May.
In May, I have to say, it's brilliant.
Yeah, if you don't have 2016.1 downloaded to allow those emails to be sent from desktop. Yeah. Because that was server functionality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is quite powerful.
Oh, it's
particularly for things like this, that you're going to notify somebody or yourself of an event that has happened. That transformer is brilliant.
Yeah, I find it excellent. I have to say it's probably I think it's probably one of my favourite changes in 2016. Yeah. So if we continue on, I will show you. So now we go in here and I enter in a point. So again, just digital, I'm still in the sites. Escape, go down here and change to my points table. So I'll just click on there. Again, I'm going to put in make sure I put in the right things that I need for my and type, I think it's decision granted. That should send through for me. Okay, so again, interactive, it's running there in the background. So now what we're hoping to get out of this is that I've just inserted, this will go into my archive table again like I showed you earlier on. So here we can see we'll have another record added there at the bottom, insert permission. So that's, as I said, that's the great thing about it, it's instant. So you've got that inserted there. Now, more importantly, when we delete this record, that should kick off that trigger to run a batch file with the published parameter of the planning reference number.
Okay.
And that's going to be sent in an email to me.
To let you know.
To let me know.
And that's all done through desktop.
That's all done through desktop. There is no server involved there whatsoever, not even for the email. Okay. So that's all done through desktop, and it's completely feasible for even kind of moderate users. You know, you don't really need to be, you don't need to be a hugely advanced user to get this working. Yeah. You know,
it is a simple enough workflow. You know, it's 4 or 5 transformers. It won't take long. I think the more difficult bit is just setting up your batch file.
That to be honest, that was the most difficult bit for me, was setting up that batch file. But I'm sure there are plenty of users out there that are well used to running batch files for their workspaces. You know, I know a lot of people would use the Microsoft Task Scheduler to run workspaces on a nightly basis or weekly basis or whatever it may be. So yeah, again, that's kind of the idea, is that with that emailer, hopefully, now I'm going to get an email that says this has been deleted. And again, it's that kind of instant notification. There was no delay, no lag, no report. It's just you need to be notified about this.
Or even if it was an insert and you had different planners that were over different areas, you could do a spatial query against that insert into what area it was inserted, and then notify the planner that they have a new.
Or even more importantly, the minute a record gets inserted, you can have validation on it. Yeah. You know, so that you're keeping your database tidy, keeping it accurate. Yeah. So there's that as well. So I just got an email in there. So what we have is perfect. Okay. So this is, dear data manager, please be aware that the following record has been deleted from the database. So here, you know, I didn't put any title, but you can put in, you know, to say that that's the planning reference number, that's the time and date, and that's the operation, again, the delete, update, insert, whatever you have it set to. So I think I have one opened here. So I'm going to talk to you now about the report. I think let's just make sure I'm on track here. Yeah, I am indeed. Okay, so right, so reporting on your triggered results. So the idea now is that what we've showed so far is we've shown something's happened in your database. It's either been written to an archive table, or you've been notified about it. But with this archive table, that's kind of ticking away there in the background. So what are we going to do with it? So it would be nice to be able to send a report to say that this has changed. And again, remember, you have your full functionality of FME. Maybe you only want to know from that table what was deleted. Yeah. So this is the thing, you can query them because it's stored in a table. You can query those changes. So with FME Server, as we said, you would just create a workspace, publish it up, and schedule it. With desktop, you would create your workspace. You would create your batch file to run that workspace, and then you would set up Microsoft Task Scheduler to run that batch file then. Again, with the reporting, it doesn't always have to be scheduled. It can be on an ad hoc basis. You can just have that report sitting there, run it when, you know, before meetings or whatever you need it for. Let's see what. Okay, so I will show you then. I probably show you the report tables. Yeah, okay. So this is the report that I built. So it's really simple. What I'm doing is I'm reading in the archive table. I've got an HTML report generator in here. So I'm just creating a header and a table. I want to show you all the changes that have gone in there in a nice table. So you saw that in the email that flashed up there a moment ago, and I'll show you that again. And I'm emailing, on one side of it, I'm emailing that off. So this is a report that you could be running weekly and send to the data manager, or send to the planning department, or send to whoever needs it. And then on the other side of it, you know, if you want to kind of create, I wanted to expose a little bit more the HTML report generator as how you can kind of start to build it in as nearly like your business intelligence. Yeah. You know, for anybody that doesn't have this, you know, the means to set up these dashboards, this is like a nice little alternative. So what I've done is, like, the idea behind this would be maybe you're reporting on this monthly. So I'm reading in all of the sites, all of the planning applications. I'm reporting on that. I'm saying, you know, give me all of the different types, and then I've put in a bar chart and a header on top of that, and then I put that into the same HTML page as the report from our changes. So we're not just going to see what's changed, we're going to see the overall picture as well. And it'll just give you a nice idea. So again, for server, you would publish this up and you would have it scheduled. For desktop, you would have this called from the batch file and you would use Task Scheduler to run it. So if I go ahead to, I didn't set up Task Scheduler because I have FME, I'm lucky enough to have FME Server at my fingertips. So if I go into, I can show you, it's really easy to set up your schedules. I'll just show you briefly. Yeah, so this is it here. So I've got, again, this is just, that's the name of my workspace. It's able to go in. And I'm able to set, you know, do I want to run it immediately, interval-based, every day? What I did was I actually came in here, you can see that's set to 8:30, and I set this yesterday, and I came in this morning, and it was literally, it was kind of, it just proved to me exactly what it's useful for, is that I was like, oh, I've got an email from FME Server, what's that on? And then I realized it was this thing that I had set up yesterday. So it was great. It was kind of, I'd already forgotten about it. I didn't have to worry about it. It was coming to me. So this is what I received through my inbox this morning. As you can imagine, that table has gotten much bigger today with kind of all the testing and demo work. So, but this is what I received this morning. It can be as complicated or as simple as you like. This is just one form of an email that I sent. You could have that as written out as a CSV file and attach it back in. You could have it written as a full-on HTML report with just a link to a page. You can have that writing into your own HTML pages. You know, it's very dynamic. So that's what was sent to me this morning. So if I go to my workspaces, and I go to demo, and I go to archive report. Make sure I've got the right workspace. And so what I had it as a job submitter. So what I could do is, because as you saw from the workspace, I had set it off as an email and I had set it off as running out to HTML report. So I could use just the job submitter and that will pop me off an email, but what I'd like to show you is the HTML report. So again, this is what I was talking about, you know, if you don't have functionality to create dashboards, this is a nice little replacement. And again, the great thing about working with HTML is that you write out these nice fancy looking charts that FME has done all the work for you, but on the back end that you can just go in and completely manipulate that page or copy and paste those charts into your existing website. You know, you can say, I want these charts put up on our website, hand it off to your IT people, and there, away you go, you know, let them work away. Exactly. So that's just ticking away there. Okay, so here we go. So that's our HTML page there. Just create a nice little chart to say these are your planning apps by type of the total applications that are in there. You know, I was able to go in and configure all of these things. You know, I was able to say I wanted to tell me what type. And a perfect example of how I was able to manipulate that, there's my email coming in. Perfect example of how I was able to manipulate the data after it came from the database was that I could, you know, there was a couple of application types in there that didn't really make any sense to me, didn't think that would be relevant, so I just kind of filtered them out, threw them all together and said they're other. Okay. You know? So you cleaned up exactly. You can clean up the output. You know, you're kind of letting the end user see what they want to see, which is great. And then here I have my full list. That's my full list in there. So you can see that it's after logging all the details that I want, which is great. And those formats you can see where the different ones are coming from, different workflows. Okay. Yeah. So if it's coming from the database, this is the format. Yeah. If it was coming from the timestamper in the other workflow for the batch file, it's actually coming from. And even just point out the user, because obviously you're doing this all from the one machine, but that user column would be very powerful to even report, then get a calculation on who has done the most edits. So if you wanted to report on job management, who is inputting the most job management, carrying responsibility, you know, who's deleting the most records. You know, so it is, you know, it's good. And again, this is calling out the machine, but there are other processes that you can do to get the exact log on. And here we have a nice little email that was sent in to me there. If you use Outlook, you're just going to have to click the download button. There you go. And that's a longer list. And that's a longer list. So maybe in this scenario, you know, if I'm not, if it's going to be a big long list, maybe I do want to write it out to CSV attached to the email as opposed to have it in here, or a link out to that HTML page. Or even better again, don't forget, as I said, you've got FME's full functionality. Once you run this report that's scheduled every week, for example, you can ask it to truncate the table afterwards.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so you can get rid of all those records,
Yeah,
because you don't archive tables, you don't necessarily need to keep all of them, or maybe you just want to get rid of anything that's an insert, because you know it's already sitting in the database. That kind of stuff. So yes, I think that is it for me. Just a quick note to say before we have a look and see if there's any questions, just a quick note to say that the next webinar that we'll have is an introduction to Map Enterprise. That's going to be on November 29th, and we'll have the registration link up on imgs.ie/upcoming webinars, and we'll get that up there as soon as possible. All right. So now I'm just going to have a quick look and see what kind of questions have come through to us today.
You just have the one so far, unless anyone wants to pop one in there now. Really, I think it's around the triggers. So we have one user just said they wouldn't be 100% confident in writing the SQL.
Yeah.
And is there samples that they can base that off? So just as a starting point?
Yeah, that's it. So if you go to that knowledge base and type in triggers, you'll see, I can actually show you. I have the link open, I think. I have the link open here. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is one of the trigger tutorials. That's the thing, they're not even just they're tutorials on how to do this and how to do it with bulk edits in Oracle, in SQL Server, in Postgres. So there really is a plethora of resources there, and also you can see there's even more articles down here on the side. So if you just go in here, and I think it's just triggers. But again, I mean, if you're stuck, please drop us an email and we'll happily send these this link off to you. So you can see everything that's coming up there, change triggers, FME workers run automatically. So you can see there's actually quite a decent amount that are on there as well.
Yeah, no, it's good. It is good to even have something to start you off with.
Yes.
And then they can go and personalize it and edit and change the publish parameters they want to send in afterwards. But to get the sample working, that would be everybody's starting point, I would think.
That's exactly, because that's what I did. I mean, I started off with, I think on that FME server trigger, I started off with just 2 parameters being, and I think, again, that's why I kind of preferred the server URL, because I could just kind of go, okay, and I just another little section in, and another little section in, and it was passing it through quite easily.
There might be one other question. Can you set the triggers to produce specific attributes, e.g. new premise IDs added to the database?
Okay, so let me just do it. So can you set triggers to produce specific attributes? So I'm not quite sure what you mean by produce, but if you mean, I
assume that the new premise ID would probably be something that was inserted.
Oh,
so
okay.
To pick that up.
Yeah, you
which
can,
is like that you're doing with your planning rep.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's the idea of these triggers is that the record has already gone into that table. So if that new premise ID column exists in the table, you're going to be able to pull that out into your trigger. Yeah. Or even more so, if that new record comes in and it's an insert in your workspace, you can create that new premise ID and you can write that in. Yeah. You can update the schema in your database that way.
Yeah.
You know?
No, definitely that would be kind of standard to your workflow to get any new information into the FME process.
Yeah, I hope that answers that question. But if not, please do drop us an email and we'll be happy to expand on that. Yeah. Anything else? Is there one other one there?
No, I think that's it.
That's everybody? Okay.
Yeah. You know where to contact us anyway, support@imgs.ie, and obviously myself or Lauren can give you instructions on how you can start off with this process. Oh, is there any more coming in? Yeah. Hold on, we got another one. Can you send the workspaces shown, please? And that's from John Hawkins.
Yep, John. We can indeed. Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, so we're going to sign off.
Yep, I think that if there's no more questions there, but again, please do drop us an email. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to speaking to you again.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, bye.